Hi everybody, I'm Bree the Plant Lady, and today I am back at Massey Lane Gardens here in Middle Georgia. This is the home of the American Camellia Society's Camellia collection, and I'm super excited. Today is a gorgeous sunny day. It's about 20 degrees warmer than yesterday, and the American Palm Society is actually having their national event here today. It's filled with all the who's who in the horticulture industry. I'm really excited to catch up with some longtime friends, and today I'm going to take you through the Species Camellia collection that was donated primarily from Dr. Clifford Parks, my former employer and mentor, who I dearly miss, and I know that he would be really excited to see how all the plants are growing. So I can't wait to take you all along on this second edition of the tour here at Massey Lane Gardens. They did have a hard frost last night. A lot of the magnolias are showing significant damage, but I think that the camellias do look perfectly fine. So that is exciting. So this is a part of the garden that Hillary and I didn't make it to at all yesterday. And well, I'm just thrilled to see what lies ahead. Well, just standing here in this spot, there's a lot of fragrant plants that are both blooming and will be blooming later. So of course you've got Daphnes that are in bloom, and the fragrance is so amazing. These variegated plants are actually gardenias, and you can see Southern Indica azaleas are starting to flower here. There's some tea olives, and actually this osmanthus fragrance has flowers on it. They're small, but boy, they pack a punch. It's one of my favorite fragrances of any that a plant puts out. And I didn't mention this in the first edition, but high pine shade is really the ideal location for cultivating camellias. The pines actually offer some protection from cold, and of course pines indicate acidic soil, and that's precisely what most of these Asian native plants really desire, camellias in particular. But a great example, the magnolias, the saucer magnolias that I saw that were out in full exposure, were all totally brown today, but you can see that one here still has a lot of its good pink color. And that's definitely because of the protection from these trees. Same thing goes here for this star magnolia. You see they have not turned brown. They look great. However, those star magnolias that were out in full exposure are all completely toast. Here's just a snapshot of kind of what the South looks like in late winter. You've got azaleas, you've got two different varieties of magnolia, and then you've got a huge camellia backdrop. So many flowers at this time of year. With relatively mild temperatures and plenty of rain, especially this year, everything is really, in full swing. To me, it seems early. Probably for Middle Georgia, this is relatively on time, maybe a week or two early, but it's a beautiful sight. For anybody living in a cold environment, I hope that this will bring you some happiness and warmth and hope of spring on the horizon. All right, my camellia instincts weren't wrong. This is hard to read, but this is a reticulata and hybrid garden planted in 1996. And again, I'm not super familiar with all the reticulata varieties because they're basically allocated to greenhouse production in my region. They're not really reliably hardy outside, but they do have really big flowers. I mean, you can see, so these are now showing cold damage, likely from last night, but the blooms are really big. So that's, when I talk about dirty Kleenex camellias, this is exactly what I'm referring to. Is, the tissue is really not, it doesn't like to be frozen. Of course, these plants are totally hardy for these temperatures. Raleigh is significantly colder than here in middle Georgia. I do wish that the individual plants were labeled. I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of frustrating to take you on a tour and not be able to give you cultivar information. So this pocket here looks to be all a Sasanqua, or predominantly a Sasanqua fall blooming collection. So these would have bloomed, you know, September, October, November, December. And you can see no blooms at this stage in February. But really great sized plants for suburban screening. And you know, this is where I think a lot of times our landscape industry doesn't put the plant in the right place. And so a lot of times your foundation plants get too big and they grow over your windows, and you end up with 80-foot tall conifers between houses. And what you actually need is this sort of scale in between houses. But Sasanqua camellias don't necessarily need to be up against the foundation of your house. And I think visiting gardens like this will give people a better concept of ultimate plant size, a realistic plant size, so that you lower your maintenance by putting plants in appropriate spots on your property. Okay, now I'm getting reinvigorated because this is definitely the species collection, and the species all have so many unique attributes. And a little history about Dr. Parks and his mission with camellias. He was breeding for cold hardiness and introduced the April series, which is really the best in the zone 6 hardy camellias. But he was also really intrigued with different species, underutilized species of camellias, and made many trips to Asia collecting seed and bringing the seed back legally and growing them out. And that was a big part of our propagation and production system at Camellia Forest. And he was always just wanting to get these species into other people's hands so they could really appreciate the diversity of this genera. And earlier this week, I was at the Mountain Research Crop Station in Mills River, North Carolina. Dr. Tom Rainey and his team are doing really cool camellia breeding, and with many different species, and actually some species that we didn't even have at Camellia Forest. So I love that Cliff's legacy lives on, and we've really just scratched the surface in camellia breeding, particularly with interesting species that are underutilized. I mean, though we have a saturation of Camellia japonicas in the market, there's endless opportunities to make these plants kind of have a better flowering quality and better form and shape for the landscapes of the future. But look at that label. This is a great label. So Eucyanensis is one that is often used in hybridizing. In fact, I think Yume is half Eucyanensis, and it has really nice kind of heart-shaped petals and a light fragrance. And you can see a fairly nice, tight, upright growing habit and a profuse flowering habit as well. It's a great landscape camellia. Well, this camellia in front of me here is Camellia polyodonta, and it's pretty distinct in that its foliage is quite different looking compared to, say, a japonica or a Sasanqua, which has much smaller foliage. A lot of the flower buds have clearly been damaged in the cold, probably that holiday freeze, but it's great to see this plant doing as well as it's doing here. Now this plant here is one of my favorite species, and we used to grow a lot of this at Camellia Forest. This is Camellia checkangoliosa, and you can see there's a large kind of magenta single flower there. Interestingly enough, the buds on this actually do look this way. This isn't frost damage, but a lot of times people think it is frost damage and they break them off. So usually my recommendation with camellias is not to interrupt the bud cycle, and you know, if they were truly cold damage, they would abort and fall to the ground. For anyone wondering how to spell checkangoliosa, great thing with botanical Latin is it's actually pronounced exactly the way it's spelled. generally speaking, every vowel is a new syllable. And you can see the flowers they're not like they're that different, but there's definitely a different shape. They're denser. And again, that flower bud that looked like it was frost damaged, that's actually what it looks like. So, reminder, don't pluck off any brown looking flower buds on your camellias just in case. Hope springs eternal. So behind me here is another one of my favorite camellia species. This is just about done flowering. It's a small white flower, but when it blooms, it's significant. It's almost like a loropetalum in that there's just thousands of flowers at once. This is Camellia griegii, and I actually do grow this at home. I have it right off of my back deck. I grow mine in full sun, and it does really, really well. A nice small leaf species, also relatively petite habit. I mean, you can see, you know, it's tall, but you know, it's appropriate again for like property screening. It's definitely ultimate size is going to be smaller than say like a 30-year-old Camellia japonica. And again, just generally just an underutilized species that I hope videos like this will make more people aware of, so that you'll develop a broader interest in growing camellias beyond just japonica and sasanqua. Here we have a slightly larger, more mature plant of Camellia eusianensis, and I just wanted to show you a better flower than what I showed you before. You can see the really distinct, much more petite, but you really see that heart shape in the leaf. Just, I think, a really beautiful flower. And again, this is a species that is often used for breeding. And in fact, Camellia brie, named for me, has this in its parentage. And another eusianensis, I think what's really interesting, these species are all grown from seed. They're very, very rarely propagated asexually. And so you end up getting a lot of diversity in their growing habit. And, you know, what I would always be looking for when I was working at Camellia Forest is, you know, density of flower buds on a stem to make it, you know, highly floral. And so compared to the other eusianensis plants that I've shown you, obviously this species or this specimen has, you know, better landscape value because of how many blooms it has. Now that can also be impacted culturally by where it's sited and how much sunlight it's getting. But more often than not, with Camellia species, it's actually just the genetic variability of growing from seed. And it's really funny, I said the who's who of horticulture is here at Massey Lane today. She just ran into Tony Avent, my former boss from Plant Delights Nursery. And he was very enthusiastic also about the species collection, which I just can't say enough about how interesting these plants are and how much I want more people to know about them, because camellias are just a really awesome plant, particularly for warm regions, and there's so many more opportunities to grow better diversity with this genera. And so I'm glad I'm not an island, at least not today. So what species are we at right now?
This is cordifolia.
Ooh.
I've never heard of.
I haven't either.
So see, cordifolia. Yes.
Everyone, this is Tony Avent, owner of Plant Delights Nursery.
Hello.
Well, I bet this is a cool one with small flowers.
Most likely.
A great privet replacement.
It looks very much like privet, actually. But probably doesn't cause the ecological problem.
Definitely not, because you can tell they aren't doing a lot of micromanaging of the land, and there's not a heavy seeding issue around any of these
Not
species.
at all. No. Pretty cool.
I am in a giant seed-grown patch of Camellia checkangoliosa, and just from panning, I hope you can see the diversity of size, form, even some relative flower color, flower shape. There are some that are, redder, and more others that are pink. It's really cool having these all planted together so that you can see the differences within a species. So this large, very shiny leaf belongs to Camellia semiserrata. And I don't have much experience growing this. It's certainly not hardy for us outside in Zone 7, but it's a really attractive plant. I mean, you can see it's so shiny. The leaves feel like plastic. Looks like probably reddish to pink flowers. Don't see any that are actively open, but a really attractive plant, almost like kind of mirroring a large leaf holly. So just like that grove of checkangoliosa, I have just stumbled into a grove of tea, Camellia sinensis. And this is actually a great example of the diversity in tea plants. Now, I explained this in the video that I posted yesterday, the first edition here from Massey Lane. Remember, all tea is produced from Camellia sinensis, or at least all tea that has caffeine. Not herbal tea, but caffeinated tea. The distinction between black, green, and white tea is actually all in the processing. So when you're harvesting tea, you're harvesting the top 2 leaves in a bud, and that's actually when they're flushing. And they're not flushing yet, but probably here in a few weeks they would be at that stage. And then you're bruising the leaves and then drying them in a very low temperature, kind of low and slow. And obviously black tea is the strongest. Always the first pour of the tea that you harvest has the highest concentration of caffeine. And I know from experience, like, I can't drink it after 12 p.m. because I will be up for the next 48 hours. Homegrown tea is definitely has a higher caffeine concentration because it's processed differently than, say, like what Lipton does. So Lipton is using, machinery. You're getting stems and not the ideal concentration. Whereas when you're hand harvesting, you have total control over that. But what I really wanted to show you is there's a lot of diversity in the leaf size. And again, this is part of plant breeding, but also just growing out things from seed. So here is a variety of Camellia sinensis called Tea Breeze. And this is a great one. It's a really heavy flowering form. You see all the brown here, those are the seed pods. You saw the leaf size, okay, compared to my fingers. Then we come here, which would be a large leaf tea, and look how much bigger these leaves are. So from the perspective of efficiency for harvesting, especially as a home gardener, a larger leaf Camellia sinensis is more efficient because you're going to have more material to be able to brew. Whereas small leaf tea, which is actually Camellia sinensis varieties sinensis, a variant within the species, is a little bit more tedious. And then just deciding what to grow, it's going to basically be based off of how much space you have to allocate. As you can see, tea plants are generally as tall as they are wide. Count on them being at least 5 by 5. Now, if you're harvesting, you're going to be able to manage their size a little more efficiently. If you're not planning to harvest, count on them getting significantly larger. So here's a really interesting species. I think it has really cool, distinct foliage, very pointy and narrow. This is Camellia Massey. And you can see it's got flowers. They're not quite open yet, but they will be blooming soon. And another one that I just think this has a really elegant form. And, as you can see, size-wise, Again, this is a really appropriate size for kind of a regular lot, you know, a suburban yard. I really have always admired the growing habit of this particular species. And here is a species I have never heard of, so I have no information about it at all. But this is Camellia retinocarpa. Show you that. I really like these labels. This is a great long-term solution. I have no idea where they got these. Maybe obviously someone made them. But this is a really attractive plant. Again, kind of skinnier, narrow, evergreen foliage. I don't see any blooms, but I'm definitely going to be looking this plant up. Now, as I pan around, you see they actually have lots of room to be able to continue this collection. And it'd be really great with some of the new breeding that's happening that perhaps maybe they can get in touch and take on some of the interesting new interspecific and complex hybrids that various breeders throughout the Southeast are working on. You gotta love a garden that has open space, endless opportunities to fill it up. Well, if you watched my videos with any regularity, you know that I have a real soft spot for white-edged flowering varieties. And this is the original white-edged flower. This is Tama noora. And you can see it's just a beautiful single sort of red to dark pink with a white edge on that flower petal. So the story behind this was found by a logger in Japan, and he recognized that this flower was distinct, so he saved the tree. And it was then heavily propagated over a period of, I think, maybe 15, 20 years to the demise of the plant. However, because it had been propagated and circulated worldwide, the variety was saved. And then the Nuccio family, who owns Nuccio's nursery out in Southern California, started breeding with it, and they basically introduced the Tama series, which includes Tama Americana, one of my favorites, Tama Vino, Tama Peacock. There's actually a whole bunch of different varieties in the Tama series that all start with this as its parentage. So I think it's a really cool, unique story about how this kind of white-edged flower began. And I'm really glad to see Tama noora here in the collection at Massey Lane. And in yesterday's video, I referenced a virus that causes variegation, but here is real variegation. I don't know the cultivar of this because I can't find a label. But this, I think, is a really beautiful plant. I love that it's got petaloids. And I really love this variegation. Though it's subtle, it's bright enough that you definitely notice it. Well, everyone, I hope that you've enjoyed these tours from Massey Lane Gardens here in Middle Georgia. Highly recommend, if you are a camellia enthusiast, that you put this garden on your must-visit list. And I do hope for those of you who live in zones where you can't grow camellias, these videos will serve as some inspiration for all of you. And I hope that my deep love and affection for the genera Camellia has shown through very sincerely. I think that the world is a better place because of camellias, and I hope all of you will feel the same. Well, as always, thanks so much for watching, everybody. Happy gardening.